In today's video, we have Blizzard's signs of life after the Christmas holiday break, because we have gotten today the newest of the balance tuning for the Midnight Beta from Blizzard, about 10, 11 almost days before the pre-patch of Midnight coming out in the War Within. We have spec changes in the beta. Now, it's not that much, we're not changing about some massive overhaul of many specs, but some of these changes are quite interesting, also to some of the more popular and more played specs right now in the Midnight's beta, starting with the number one, which is Arcane Mage. Arcane Mage has received a handful of changes in this last balance tuning. The first one, just starting on the positive side of the notes, is the nerf. You have gotten your Arcane Barrage damage nerf by 15%. Now, funnily enough, Arcane Mage wants to stay even both in Raid and Mythic Plus, so their Arcane Barrage damage is very similar between the two activities. So this nerf is an equal, more or less, for both activities, 4 to 5% overall damage nerf. The more relevant change, though, is the change regarding your talent 3, because you read at first, Intuition has been re-added to the talent 3 and now grants an extra 25% more damage. Now, you might be excited at first because Intuition is already existing in the War Within's live talent 3, the one that gives you the RNG chance to make your next Arcane Barrage deal 50% more damage and, more importantly, generate full arcane charges. No, what you get is the newer version, which is that once you get max arcane salvo stacks, your next arcane barrage does 25% more damage. So no, you don't have the RNG proc, which guarantees to get full arcane charges after you cast arcane barrage. Also, more importantly, is the fact that currently, as we have covered arcane changes for Midnight already, the entire new scope of your talent 3 is replacing Arcane Harmony, which previously used to be an end of the 3 capstone talent, into basically the whole core of your 3, because now Arcane Salvo, which is just about the same thing, is at the very early entry points of your talent 3. What's more is that as of right now, pretty much all mages are going to be taking Arcane Singularity. So every stack of this Arcane Salvo is going to give you 7% more Arcane Barrage damage. And it stacks up to 20, even more so if you are Sun Fury, which you are right now as an Arcane Mage. It stacks up to 25 times. So we're talking about a 140 to 175% damage bonus if you reach max stacks of Arcane Salvo. So add in this Intuition talent, which further increases this buff by 25% when you were already getting it buffed by 140 to 175% damage increase, is not that relevant. You already had a very clear incentive in getting up to near max stacks of Arcane Salvo anyways. Even more so, you wanted to get at max stacks because you are playing with things like Orb Barrage, so you wanted to get your near or certain guarantee of spawning an Arcane Orb because you had very high Arcane Salvo stacks. So this talent is kind of sort of pointless to be brought back again in this state. What makes this a bit annoying is that, fine, sure, we might just skip it, just add it back to the talent 3 anywhere here, and we just choose whether or not we can find a way to squeeze in a talent point or not. Well, the problem is that your new Intuition has been put here, and that's a gate to the pathway of many other talents you are already picking in the current beta of Midnight. But it was curious to add this Intuition back, make it much more straightforward as a very flat and boring damage increase at the end of your Arcane Salvo stacks, when you already have multiple other very important buffs, very important power-ups at the end of these Salvo stacks, so you didn't really need this talent on top of those, and more importantly, to make it sort of block other talents, so not to really make it a choice whether you want to pick this talent or not. The next of the important changes is to Survival. It's particularly important because Survival has been one of the better performing specs right now in the beta. Not as much in the Raid, even though it's okay, the performance there, more so in Mythic Plus. The change, and initially we are happy about it, because the change is something we have complained about when we went over Survival in our review of the spec, which was this thing right here. And my focus doesn't go down. My focus, I think, peaks to a lowest of like 70 at most, out of 125. That's how low it goes. focus is essentially a non-issue as a resource in your spec. So the complaint was focus is a meme. You have a resource which you don't actually do anything about. Most of your spells don't even cost focus, they are free, so your focus doesn't really do anything. So Blizzard has listened to this, has listened to the complaint, and now the changes are that Boomstick costs 50 focus instead of 30, Flame Fan Pitch now costs 20 instead of being free, Wildfire Bomb costs 20 instead of being free. And then for more leeway in generating more focus, because now you have to spend more, you get now 2 charges of Kill Command instead of having a single one. So now that you have a more healthy and balanced economy of your focus spending, you are now starting to think about, okay, how do we make focus valuable? How do we make it enjoyable to play around, right? Blizzard surely has cooked up something to make you work around this resource. We cooked up some of the examples of what you might want to see to make focus enjoyable as part of your rotation. For example, casting Wildfire Bomb below 80 focus is going to do increased damage. So now you have incentive of tracking your focus and casting Wildfire Bomb at the right moment. Maybe casting Boomstick below 60 focus is going to reduce the cooldown of Boomstick by 15 seconds. Perhaps Boomstick is going to consume all of the extra focus past the 50 it costs to deal 15% more damage per 10 extra focus it consumed. So if you wait to have full 125 focus, you are basically going to be doing double damage with your Boomstick. Maybe, since we have complained, one of the complaints of Survival was their stack of useless bleed talents, maybe now focus generation is increased by 20% per active bleed. So if you play with bleeds, you might double your focus generation. Maybe even something more to manage, like casting abilities when you are above half of your focus grants a 20% stacking crit chance, and then casting an ability below 60 focus consumes those stacks to gain the bonus crit chance on the ability. So you can plan, for example, going below 60 focus before guaranteeing a crit on your big Boomstick button or on your takedown cooldown, for example. So we were excited now that Blizzard has normalized the focus spending of Survival on what they would have then done with focus with the spec. Nothing. They have done nothing for the spec. These are just focus cost increases, but the spec is still completely empty of any kind of synergy, any kind of buffs or mechanics working around focus. Whether you're spending abilities with full focus, with no focus, half focus, doesn't matter. Focus is still very boring, a very passive and a very brain-dead kind of resource, even with these cost increases. Now, I'm sorry to break the heart of a few rogues who are going to go and casually read the notes and notice that Sinister Strike has gotten its damage increased by 311%. Which is funny because if you were to look at the actual current Sinister Strike damage of your average Outlaw Rogue, we're talking about a 10+% damage increase to the whole spec if you were to get this buff. Unfortunately, this buff is to the leveling version of Sinister Strike, the level 1 auto-learned spell of Sinister Strike, not the final max level version of Sinister Strike. So effectively you don't actually gain anything with this Sinister Strike change. Now the last of the changes goes to Paladin as a whole. The 1-2 Ret can be more or less excluded and ignored because it's just a second charge of Crusader Strike. Now Crusader Strike is not really that big of a keystone button in your rotation. When you are in your cooldowns, you're flooding with so much holy power and free spenders that you don't even bother to cast the spell altogether. And even in your downtime, even in your lower DPS, more laid back part of the rotation, you're just more than fine using your current 1 charge strike anyway. So getting the second charge for Ret is not that relevant. Getting a second charge for Prot Paladin is also completely useless since you don't use Crusader Strike as a Prot Paladin. What is more relevant, much more relevant for Prot Paladin is the fix, the bug fix of Imbued Shield. It's a good fix because this passive right here was essentially broken, and instead of making your Shielded Righteous reduce magical damage taken by 10%, it was increasing the magical damage taken you were taking by 10%. So effectively, if you were playing with this talent pre-fix, and now you're playing with this talent, you're getting a minus 20% magical damage taken. You went from taking plus 10 to now taking minus 10. It's a pretty big swing. It would be a pretty big swing if the talent was being played, right now 90+% of Prot Paladins in the beta are playing with Redoubt, the newly buffed Redoubt, now buffing your Shield of the Righteous armor by 50% up to your missing HP. Usually, you know, as a reminder, for example, in Mythic Plus, the average damage taken of a tank is going to be between 60 and 70% of physical damage taken, and then 40 at the very highest to 30-25% of magical damage taken. So in general, buffing your armor is always a safe choice. So Redoubt still seems to be ahead of this Imbued Shield, even now that Imbued Shield actually works as a passive. Then you have the last of the changes, which are for Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin, on top of getting the damage increase 30%, you also get the second charge to Crusader Strike. Now, this might seem cool at first, however, it's pointless. It is pointless because in Midnight, the only way for you as a Holy Paladin to play with this button is when you click Avenging Crusader. So, first, you actually have to play the build for Avenging Crusader instead of playing with Wings. 2, even if you do play with Avenging Crusader, you're likely going to play a combination of Call of the Righteous and Sanctified Rat, making your Avenging Crusader last 15 seconds. So basically, Crusader Strike will be active for 15 seconds, and then not available for 30, and then active for 15, not available for 30, so for basically a third of your time playing. The problem is that it's pointless, because as of right now, you're already perfectly able to use your first charge, your one only charge of Crusader Strike, into Holy Shock, into Hammer of Wrath, into Spender. Right now, most of the time, Word of Glory. And then back to Strike, and then back to Holy Shock, and then back to Hammer of Wrath, and then back to Spender. You don't need a second charge. You already have a very low, it's at the base cooldown of your Crusader Strike is 4.2 seconds, hasted down with haste, which is a good stat for Holy Paladin. It's gonna be down to like 3.5 or so seconds. So a 4-button rotation is more than enough to not even need a second charge on this button anyways. You also already have, of course, a very short cooldown of both Holy Shock and Hammer of Wrath. They have a base 6-second cooldown, it gets hasted down, you will play with Crusader's Might, reducing the cooldown of your Judgment, and then also of Hammer of Wrath even further, so giving the second charge of Crusader Strike is not even that relevant for Holy Paladin. Unless they are planning, of course, of changing the spell as a whole and bringing it back as a baseline button, so you also have it available outside of Avenging Crusader at all times, that would make more sense. But as long as this button is only up and available inside of Avenging Crusader, the second charge is not that valuable for the spec. These actually were, so far, the only changes, the only PvE tuned changes we have gotten for today. So at least we have a sign of Blizzard still alive, and we will see if at this point there is basically two resets left before the pre-patch goes live, and then you have the last stretch that will be the ultra quality, ultra high level and dangerous, we have to warn everyone, dangerous to inhale level of copium for you to hope for some sweeping changes to happen to your spec if they haven't happened already. But at least we have the confirmation we are still up and running with some balance tuning changes for specs. We will see as time goes on what more we will get, but for now, this was the set of changes getting into this weekend for Midnight's beta. So, for today, on this Friday, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, it's cool. We have been going back for like a week straight of -degrees, temperature, clean skies, sun, no clouds, and no snow whatsoever.